Okay, you guys, we need to address something. This is very, very important. You spend $500 to $1,000 on a fly rod, a couple hundred up to $1,000 on a reel, some fancy $800 waders and some boots and a fly line and a pack and hats and fancy sunglasses. And yet after spending all of this stuff, you trust the connection between yourself and a potential trophy of a lifetime to a little piece of metal that literally costs the same as a gumball. Let's talk about that.
That's a big brown, bro.
Okay, so we've all been there. You hook this fish, you feel that energy, feel it's a big one, your heart gets racing, you're stoked to be able to get that photo you can post on the Instagram for all your buddies to see, and then all of a sudden, pop, that fish is gone. You reel your thing in, and you realize that little piece of metal just straightened out on you. Or even worse, you realize that you had set the hook, fought him for a sec, and he got off because he didn't get penetration there. So, what I liken that to is if you're fishing with poor quality hooks that might snap or break or not be sharp enough, that's kind of like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Or actually like bringing a bendy paper clip to a huge tug-of-war with a giant feral hawk. Either way, you both lose. So let's talk about hook quality. First off, there is such thing as good quality hooks and bad quality hooks. And when we're talking quality, that typically has to do with the processes that the hooks are made, the material that they're made, the style of processes they went through to make the hook, as well as the material with which the hook is made. And then to top that all off, the hooks are sharpened with different methods. And so that's something else that we'll get to as well. But when it comes to hook quality, you do not want a fish to bend out your hook when you're fighting them. What that means is, me being the nerdy guy that I've always been, I wanted to kind of put some numbers to this. So I actually went into my secret mad scientist lab and I bought myself a little strain. It is basically a device that measures the strength of compound bow, and it gives you the peak force that's required to make that hook fail. Now, this was not extremely scientific, mostly scientific because I'm not a scientist, but I do like science and I do like breaking things. So here's what I did. Was I went down into the shop, and these are all hooks that we sell. And I was on the fence as to whether I wanted to show you the brands, but I realized that it's very difficult to compare one brand and one hook model to another fairly. So to give everybody in this test the benefit of the doubt, what I did instead was I grabbed one of the higher end. And when I say higher end, I'm talking price, and let's just call it perceived quality for now, and maybe a mid-range, and then kind of the more economical hook selection. And in order to make it relatively apples to apples, I ended up going with size 14 dry fly hooks from these different manufacturers. Now, some other thing to understand about hook manufacturing, a lot of the hook manufacturing happens in a, let's call it, small number of manufacturing facilities in China, Japan, or Korea. And that's great. That's how the system works. They would be likely exorbitantly too expensive if they were made here in the US. But it is what it is. So that's where we are. And that does not mean that anything foreign made is going to be garbage, or anything made anywhere else is going to be good. Because, and here's one thing I did find, lots of hook quality issues we've seen over the years with all the brands. So nobody is immune to maybe quality control issue or something else. But all of this experimentation did at least prove to be fairly well that the price on the hooks by and large correlates to the quality of the metal for this first experiment. So what I did, I loaded up this force gauge, breaking strength gauge, and I put the hook in the vise, attached some 10-pound fluorocarbon to it, tried to make the knots exactly the same, put the hook in the vise, and then attached the other end of that tippet to my force meter, let's just call it that. And I would pull on that force meter with force down on the base of the vise so I didn't mess anything up. And then I would pull that until the hook either broke or straightened out. And the force meter there will actually give me the highest point at which that exerted force before it failed. What I found was very interesting. With dry fly hooks, you would expect not the greatest breaking strength. The wire is a little, in most cases, a little finer wire. And I did notice a little bit of a difference between the models that we tested in terms of their wire diameter. However, the breaking strength was not necessarily driven by the thickness or my perceived thickness of the wire. It was entirely the metal. And so what we found, and again, this is an average and this is not in every testing scenario, but by and large, our higher end hooks, so the more quality brands, ones that you're probably more familiar with. In this case, with the dry fly hook, the average breaking strength was around 7 pounds, which is good. So number one, my tippet didn't break, to kind of put it in realistic terms. And number two, I was happy that it took that much to break. Okay. And most of the rest of the ones that I tested on the higher end were kind of in that same range. Some had more, some had less, but say on average we're around 7. And then when we went to look at more of the economical hooks that we have, again, these are ones that we sell, so I'm not saying don't buy any of the other hooks except the most expensive ones, but we did find the breaking strength on those to be significantly lower. There were a couple that failed by bending out and not breaking, so they were a little less brittle, and then some that just broke, but it was at about the same amount of pressure. So whether it straightens out or whether it breaks in half, kind of sixes, I still lose the fish. That does not mean that you go buy the biggest, thickest wire that you can find. We'll talk about that in a minute. However, it does mean you need to be cognizant of the quality of the hooks that you use. So while this doesn't mean go out and buy the most expensive hooks all the time, it is important to note, it's kind of like driving a Ferrari, pulling up, and you've got a bunch of retreads as tires. It's gonna look super, super cool in the parking lot with all your buddies, but as soon as you jet off to hot dog around, take your first corner and you're wiped out. Nor is the solution, like I said, to go out and buy the thickest, heaviest gauge wire you can get with a hook, because that's kind of like taking your 3-weight, this is a 3-weight, to the water and using a hook with a wire the size of a friggin' railroad spike and hoping to drive that into the mouth of a fish. It's not gonna work. So what does that mean? I would say if you are at all concerned about the quality of hooks, try them out. You know, like I said, we in the shop, we sell a wide variety of prices of hooks. Some have really good, I would say, quality metal, some maybe less than stellar. But if you are concerned, give them a test yourself. You can ask us in the comments below what, you know, if it's a brand that you would trust. But at the end of the day, you want to spend money on something that will not bend out or break. So the quality of that hook is very important. Okay, so we talked a lot about quality of the metal. Lots to be said about that. The next two kind of go hand in hand, but I think they are too. So first we're going to talk about hook sharpness, and then we're going to talk about hook penetration. Those are the number 2 and number 3 things that you want to look at when you're talking about hooks. Now that leads into the second thing that we're going to talk about in terms of what to look for in a hook, and that's sharpness. So if you're fishing a extremely good quality hook or have tied flies on hooks, we're talking the same thing here, whether you tie them or buy them, and you fish that, and as you're fishing, getting some nicks and dings on the hook point, that will introduce burrs and potentially rolled points. What does a rolled point look like? Well, we'll show you with this fancy little graphic. Also, what is a burr? Okay, we're going to get to burrs in a minute, but for the most part, and this is an easy way to test a hook, if you take that hook point and you put that on your thumb with the hook point and kind of lightly dig into your thumbnail and pull it, if you feel that hook digging into your nail, not too hard, it typically means it's very sharp. If you look at it, you could visibly see a burr or a rolled point, then you need a handy dandy hook hone or a hook sharpener, and that can clean those right up. For the most part, if I've gotten any snags or hit rocks or nicked things That's one of the first things I do to test for sharpness. Now, with sharpness, there's another thing. You may have heard the term called chemically sharpened hooks. When hooks are made, by and large, it's a mechanical process, so they have ways that they grind these pieces of wire to a fine hook point. And in the process of doing that, it does leave some burrs. I'm going to show you a couple of photos. One is from a non-chemically treated hook, and the other is from a chemically treated hook. You will see in the difference between those. Now, there's going to be some little, probably dust particles or something in there too, but there are some legit burrs. But you can see the difference. The hook that's not chemically sharpened has some pitting. It also has more burrs, where the chemically sharpened hook does not, or at least not as many. What does that mean? Well, number one, if the hook is not as sharp as it can be, it's going to be much harder to penetrate the fish's mouth to hook a fish. So a chemically sharpened hook will tend to hook a little quicker, penetrate a little quicker. Also, the cone that forms the hook on a chemically sharpened hook can be longer and skinnier. So again, that's less friction and less resistance as you go to set that hook into the fish's mouth. And I will mention this as a third factor within that, and that is the barb. A barbed fly, contrary to popular belief, often, I would say most of the time, would be much more difficult to penetrate the hook into the fish's mouth because you've got a barb you're working against. I mean, the barb obviously goes both ways. It makes it harder for the fish to shake the hook, but it's also much harder for you to set and penetrate the mouth. So if you wanted best penetration, sharpest, you're probably going to want to look at a barbless hook. Now, it's up to you to keep that hook on, or keep that fish on as you fight it. So sharpness is a big deal. I will say, in general, chemically sharpened hooks do have some disadvantages. They can be a little more brittle. And so this is, again, a trade-off. If you are going for smaller fish, you can fish smaller flies, you can fish a lighter weight wire. And so the sharpness is going to matter on that, because if you're not fishing a very sharp hook, it's going to be much more difficult with a lower or a smaller rod, smaller weight rod, a smaller fish, and if you had to use a bigger fly, that point. So you got to look at the factors that impact penetration when you're doing those hook sets. And sharpness is probably the biggest one there. Okay, so at the end of the day, the most important thing for you is to feel confident. And to me, confidence is a gear setting. If you feel confident, if I'm going to go and set the hook on a fish, I want that confidence to be that that fish is going to be hooked and stay hooked. At the same time, if I want to cast downstream and I get hooked on a log or a rock or something, I also want that hook to stand up to either being resharpened or not busting off. Okay, so what that really means, I don't want to be gentle. I want to be effective. And having the confidence that that hook's going to stand up to the test and be able to hook fish and also do all the other business you need it to do to get out of snags and stay sharp and all that, that's a big deal. Especially if you tie your own flies. One of the biggest things is that you want to build your flies on a good foundation. You take 5, 10, 20 minutes tying a fly, you don't want that thing to bust off. So what that means is build that fly on the best foundation possible. Just like you wouldn't build a skyscraper in the middle of a swamp, you want to build those flies you tie or buy on the best hook foundation that there is. We hope this has been helpful. Again, I'm not calling out brands, and we're not doing experiments across all hook models and all hook styles, because that would be very time consuming and I don't know if it'd be super helpful. But at the end of the day, I want you to remember these things when it comes to choosing flies and hooks that you buy, when it comes to catching fish. You don't want to be sitting around pissed off that you missed the fish of a lifetime because your gumball expensive hook failed and left you holding nothing. So if you want to see me destroy expensive waders in the next video, drop a comment below. Anyway, check us out at flyfishfood.com, and remember, tie better and fish better.